Luke Mehall. Welcome to Dirtbag Rich.
Thank you. Thank you. Good to be with you, Blake.
What does the American dream mean for you?
I guess my definition right now comes a lot from spending a lot of time in Mexico, and seeing, I think that for me, it means like having the economic security to achieve what you want to do with your life. I think, yes, especially seeing in Mexico and seeing, like why people come from a place that doesn't have as good of an economy to a place that does have a better economy. I think there's probably a lot of BS in the American dream, but I do think there is, still that opportunity where it's a place where you can kind of, if you are an immigrant, like all of us, except for I guess Native Americans and African Americans, came there as immigrants to improve your life. So I feel like it's like having that economic base to then be able to do what you'd like to do with your life and achieve your goals with your career and in your life.
It's fascinating that you have perspective on the American dream while being in Mexico. I mean, what do you witness down there? What's this contrast that defines the American dream for you now that you're outside of America?
I mean, I guess like, I grew up middle class in the United States, and sure, you see images of people that live in poverty. And then there's even people that have less of, in the town I grew up in, there were lower class, so-called lower class people. Um, but you just see that, you see a reason that people move to the United States from another place. So, I guess it's as simple as that. It's just like, there are people that see a opportunity to have a better economic status, and it's often for, they either bring their whole families there or they support their families back in another place. So I don't think I ever realized what it was like to be American, especially, kind of growing up in like, so-called like middle class way. You just, to me, that seemed normal, but then you travel the world and you're like, oh, actually being middle class in the United States is like something to seek out, or something that other people seek that out quite a bit. And then, yeah, just being down in Mexico, you kind of see that economic reality for a lot of people.
So, how is your version of living the American dream different from the standard version of the American dream?
I in some ways it's not all that different, but I think for me and us as, outdoor recreationists, climbers, etc., we're kind of using that economic power or whatever you want to say to like have the time to go pursue your activity. And I feel like that's what is unique. It's like, yeah, I guess mine is different in the sense that I don't have like a family to support, and then I also have that thing where I'm trying to spend my free time pursuing an activity. And I think it used to take up more of my time, and now it's more of like a centerpiece of my time. Like I used to come to Potrero Chico and just dirtbag it for a month, and now I work, full time here and then also climb. So,
And for those who don't know what Potrero Chico is or why it's famous, please enlighten us.
yeah, Potrero Chico is an area in northern Mexico in the state of Nuevo Leon, and I like to describe it as the Yosemite of Mexico. To people that don't know, I'm assuming most people know what Yosemite is and El Capitan and stuff
Sure.
like that. But it's just it's the place in Mexico that attracts the most international audience to go climbing, and then there's a really kind of rich community that's transient but also constant. And yeah, it's just a very special place that have been coming to for 20 years, and I like to spend some of my time down here in the winter when it's cold in Colorado. And yeah, it's just a really special place, kind of unique ecosystem and culture, and yes, it's a very special place.
So perhaps more than anyone else, you have been using and defining the term dirtbag for quite a while, at least 15 years now, right? If not longer.
Sure, yeah.
And what you just defined as your version of the American dream of having this like time to pursue your activity, that really seems to be at the heart of dirtbagging for you. I know you've probably been asked this a million times, but how do you define dirtbag?
I think the best definition I heard is like living in the dirt out of your bag, so
I love that.
very
It's so simple.
yeah. So simple. So that's how it came about. So say you're living, I think the stereotypical American dirtbag experience would be living in a place like a Joshua Tree or something. And so now Joshua Tree is very competitive for campsites and it's on the map. But 20 years ago it was way more chill. And you could, if you evaded the authorities correctly, you could literally do that there. Rarely ever check the internet, just get a job in a restaurant. And so you don't have much money, but you have enough food, especially if you're working in a restaurant, and then you kind of live under a rock and you have all your stuff in a bag and you're dirty and gross. So I think that's the most simple thing, but it's evolved quite a bit, and I think it's that's the most simple explanation. There's, I guess, a more complicated modern thing that you could say, but yeah, that was the one I heard, and that didn't come from me. That came from someone else, but that's the most simple definition I've heard.
We'll get back to the more modern, complicated definition, but for the record, 2 years ago when I was down in El Chalten, Patagonia, Argentina, I met a Brazilian climber who was literally sleeping under a rock for weeks and weeks on end. I brought him to meet my students, and they all just, their jaws dropped when they heard him say this, with total confidence. He's like, yeah, of course I live under a rock. He's like, I'm from Brazil. I don't have a ton of money to spend. It's expensive here in El Chalten.
Yeah.
It's just the only way I can climb for a long period of time. I feel like there's a lot of mythology wrapped up in this. I mean, you came from the Midwest, you went out west, and now you have a home base in Durango, Colorado. You spend a lot of time in the mountainous or desert west, and this includes Mexico too. And what is it about this idea of these open horizons, this sort of cowboy-esque drive to go out and explore the wilderness perpetually and to like throw yourself against boulders and big walls, or to go hiking for weeks and weeks? What is it that you think, and maybe you've personally experienced, is so deeply appealing about this mythology?
I mean, for me, I'm probably 15 to 20 years removed of actually doing it like that. Now I have to have the internet. I have to be closer to society to do my job. So I'm 15, 20 years out of that experience. But the kind of the foundation for me was laid out by like the beatniks, like Jack Kerouac and Neil Cassidy and Allen Ginsberg and those guys, especially the ones that were like wrote about, kind of mountain climbing and being outdoors as Kerouac did in some of his later stuff. And then also like the Grateful Dead of getting on a bus and go traveling around. So my foundation comes from the stories that I read from the Grateful Dead and the Beatniks, and then just then meeting climbers, and to me, I realized like going around and climbing and having adventures and having your community was a lot healthier than like just following the Grateful Dead around and doing a lot of drugs. So the plan A was like following the Grateful Dead around, but the Grateful Dead didn't exist by the time I was doing that. Jerry Garcia died right as I was getting into this stuff, so this was like plan B, and it ended up being, a better path for me. And then, you just meet your friends. And I mean, I feel like it doesn't start off like with weeks on end, it starts off with just one little climbing experience. And then, and I probably only really did the hardcore dirtbagging for only really a couple years, like maybe 2, 3, 4 years. And I kind of got sick of it. But it was more like post college. I didn't really know exactly what I wanted to do, but I wanted to write. So it's like, oh, if you're if you go have these experiences, eventually you're going to have something to write about. So yeah, I guess it all started kind of with Jack Kerouac and the Grateful Dead, and then evolved into something that was connected to that, in the sense of having adventure, traveling around the United States and eventually the world. But yeah, just for me, it really stems from the beatnik and
Mm-hmm.
hippie culture. Yeah.
So there was this promise of long drug fueled road trips, essentially. I mean, if you go back and read On the Road, it's like they're just doing a lot of drugs and drinking all the time and doing a lot of stuff that's either quasi illegal or fully illegal. And there's a good amount of misogyny in it. I'm also a big fan of the Dharma Bums. Yeah, Kerouac's later book, and that really starred and held up the character of Gary Snyder, who is Jaffe in the book, and brought a much more like gentle spiritual aspect into it. But still, in that book, you just see Kerouac's alcoholism on pretty prominent display, and so it's interesting that your inspiration, and I think a lot of other people's inspiration, starts with these kind of party images, or this kind of like very cut loose and just have no boundaries whatsoever, and then it ends up being like, oh, I like meeting other people who like to climb, and then we become friends and we go hang out in national parks together or in BLM campgrounds together. It becomes a much gentler and a bit more innocent kind of thing. So tell me a little bit more about how you went out west and where you ended up landing, and maybe like what your college years and those crucial dirtbag years were like.
Yeah. So I when I ended up in Colorado, I was having like some pretty serious mental health issues. I had, you talk about, I think drugs are, it's too easy to put drugs in one category, because I think some aspects of, like I always wonder, like if Kerouac could have got off alcohol, if Kerouac just had a good mushroom trip or something, if he could have gotten off alcohol and become a climber, like if Kerouac got sober or whatever. And so I was on the influence of a lot of substances at 19, 20, and didn't have a lot of exercise. Exercise is key for me to establish and have good mental health. And I was just having, just like a lot of young 20 somethings I was just having serious mental health issues. And I kind of took off from home and was like chasing a girl, and had just like a complicated mental health situation, which you could call, suicidal, like that type of mindset that does affect a lot of people. But I ended up in this road trip I took and left from home. I ended up in this place called Gunnison, Colorado, and I enrolled in college there right away. It was like my third college, and I think the overall big college situation kind of contributed to my bad mental health, and just like the encouragement of so much partying and the frats and sororities. I just hated all that stuff. So I ended up at this liberal arts college, and was, found an environment where if I was writing poetry, my professor would be like, yeah, do more of that. Or my mentor, George Sibley, actually was like, oh, you read On the Road, you should read Dharma Bums. So I had these, I think, hidden talents that these, especially writing professors, picked up on and just nurtured. So once I in the the drug, I was like heavily prescribed, not heavily, but I was prescribed ADD medication, and I think that my overall thing with that stuff is I don't need drugs to control my ADD. I need exercise, maybe a little caffeine, maybe a little bit of weed, but certainly not drugs that are adjacent to methamphetamines, like all those ADD drugs are. So in the mental health journey, it still continues to this day. I still work on that stuff and still have a therapist and different things like that. But I basically went from just a terrible mental health state of not necessarily knowing what to live for, how to have a good routine to keep my mental health in order, to starting to have the foundation of that out in Colorado. And then, I think the exercise of climbing is very powerful, not only for your physical, but also your mental. So I feel like climbing really improved my mental health a lot. And then, having these professors that encouraged me to write, and that, paved the way, like, oh, here's something I can do in the future as a career.
Hmm.
So yeah, just leaving, getting out of the Midwest and getting to a more mountainous environment, and then getting into a education environment with smaller classrooms, and just a professor that could recognize the value of writing poetry.
If you think about sticking around the Midwest, this sort of alternate life that you could have led, and not getting to be in a smaller liberal arts college environment, but being part of like a really big state university, where do you imagine you would have ended up?
I always say dead or in jail. It's kind of dramatic, but there really was no way forward for me in those environments. Um, it just wasn't for me. And yeah, I was just heading down the wrong direction. And that's why I also say I'm like really happy that the Grateful Dead didn't exist anymore, because I don't think there was I love the music of the Grateful Dead and I love the lyrics, but the whole scene would have just devoured me.
Mm.
So I always say dead or in jail. I really do. Yeah.
So this dirtbag mythology, this go west and explore mountains. I mean, for you and maybe for a lot of people like you, it was not primarily driven by exploration, but just like saving your own mental health and not
Yeah, absolutely.
disintegrating.
Mhm. Yeah, the exploration is secondary for me. I mean, I think some other climbers have that like National Geographic story, where I saw this picture and I knew I had to do that. I would see those pictures and be like, oh, I'm never going to do that. It looks scary, but I'll climb this like yellow tape route in the gym.
Huh, got it.
Yeah.
Something that you wrote in your book, Great American Dirtbags, which was published over a decade ago now, is I'm terrified of what I become when I don't have movement, exercise, and the time to live life in the wild places of the world, to feel truly alive, like I'm not wasting a minute. Uh, have you ever been stuck? I mean, since you escaped out to Colorado, have you ended up stuck any place where you're not able to move, you're not able to get exercise or have access to wild places, or feel like you are wasting your time? Or have you essentially been free in this sense ever since your early 20s?
No, yeah, since my early 20s for sure. I think, and I don't know when exactly I would put the time frame on it, but I I always keep my exercise routine. So whether I'm visiting my parents in Illinois, or I'm in Mexico, or I'm in Colorado, I keep that routine. So I've certainly been stuck, yeah, many, many times since that time period. But now I have this routine that is, I guess, like for some other people, maybe it's medication. Yeah, I'm not dissing medication for ADD or depression or anything like that. But for me, it's just exercise, and it doesn't necessarily mean it has to be a wild place or whatever. But it's still, I think, a daily struggle to just keep up the routine. But at this age, I feel like I know whatever that endorphin biological chemical brain thing that has to be maintained. But yeah, certain days, like in Colorado, there'll be wildfire smoke outside, so you can't just go on a run. Or here in Mexico, sometimes there's a lot of air pollution, so if you go for a run, you're going to be inhaling all this air pollution.
Mm.
So there are days that happen like that, but certainly not like weeks or months or years or anything.
Can you just break it down for me with some specifics? Like if there are no environmental considerations, like what kind of physical exercise and what kind of variety of exercise or movement do you need to feel sane?
Yeah. So I mean, just to feel sane, I would say running is the base. Running in mountain biking, just cardio. climbing is, I think, kind of the next level. I think I could stay sane with just running and biking. Um, and then climbing is because climbing is more complicated. Sometimes there's risk. Sometimes it's not just a good time. But for me, it's pretty good diet, running, yoga, acupuncture, massage, um, and then climbing, and healthy relationship, healthy friendships. But yeah, there's just and weightlifting as well. Weightlifting and training has been very important to me. Actually, just in the last couple of years too. I think a lot of us in our mid 30s to 40s. I mean, the like scientific research and amount of information right now is just like weightlifting is a super important thing. And then rest too. I have to like sleep a ridiculous amount to keep up with these youngsters out here, you know?
Thank you. Let's talk a bit more about those youngsters and tell me, since you have been writing about dirtbags, and we'll talk about your zine and your podcast very shortly, for such a long time, how have you seen this dirtbag concept evolve, and what are the different flavors of dirtbag that are out there? And feel free to talk about both climbers and non-climbers, the other flavors of dirtbag.
Yeah. So I mean, I think the big switch happened with technology. I think once the smartphone kind of came on the scene and people could then like work remotely, and then people could then right now you can be you I mean, there's this guy, he passed away last year, but I was amazed by him. His name was Matt Richard. His the most recent zine is dedicated to him, but he was like 27 or something, and looked, he had like a mullet and looked like the biggest dirtbag, and he was like he had a job in finance. And so he was probably making pretty good money, but then he lived this lifestyle here that was quite similar to us 20 years ago when we were here. But when we were here 20 years ago, you check your internet like once a month at the local library. Mm-hmm. So and in some ways it's better to, maybe it's better to have a good job and have a balance to your life versus just, living hand to mouth and just climbing all the time. So I think whenever the smartphone, social media, when all that stuff came into play, and for me that was like whatever, 2008, like what was the iPhone invented in like 2007 or something. I feel like that's when the big switch happened. So then you just see people with I think the sprinter van is another thing that came along around then too. But there's just like talk about flavor, there's just more possibility, I think, for a better economic situation within just climbing. And then I think as well at 46, I only need a certain amount of climbing. I don't have to climb all the time. I'm gonna be tired if I just climb all the time. So especially being down here, I need purpose. So working 40 hours a week or however much I actually work feels really like I'm probably enjoying this just as much or more as I enjoyed the dirtbagging 20 years ago. Mm-hmm. So it's hard to say it's worse. It's definitely not hand to mouth. And then occasionally, like you say, the guy living under the rock in Argentina or whatever, like those people still exist, and maybe they exist more in places outside the United States. Maybe there aren't too many dirtbags like that. I can't imagine a dirtbag that doesn't have a smartphone and is just living under a rock in the United States. Like there's probably a couple of them, but it's certainly not prolific like it was in 2002 or something.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think the only way that I could even try to write something about the concept of dirtbag rich is if there were enough economic opportunities out there and for people to be connected to city jobs with city incomes while living in other parts of the world or living out of their cars. So I agree. It's there's just so many more possibilities, and especially if like you're doing right now, if you're someone who does make a living in the US and then choose to go spend part of your time in a country with a lower cost of living. Um, let's talk about the climbing zine and where it came from and how it sustains your life financially, Luke.
So it started. I had a buddy come up to me at a party one time, and so I was publishing my poetry in magazines and in newspapers. And he was just his name was Heady Eddie. I've kind of lost track of him, but we called him Heady Eddie. He was just a hippie guy, and he came up to me. He's like, "Have you ever heard of zines, man?" He's like, "You should do a zine." It's just a statement that someone said to me at a party, and then I was in Salt Lake one time. I was like kind of living there, but I just like ran out of money there, and I had a climbing injury that I didn't really know how to deal with. And so I found this section of the library. My friend Adam Lawton turned me on to it. He's since passed away, but he was a early supporter of the climbing zine and a good friend. And I was crashing out on his couch, and he's like, "Go check this out." So I go in the Salt Lake City zine library, and I hated every single one of these zines. Like they're all like abstract, and no diss to skate and punk culture, but I'm just not into like the abstract, like this is what I think about this random thing, and it doesn't have a story. And but there was one zine called Dishwasher that I liked, and it was about this guy Pete Jordan who tried to wash dishes in all 50 states.
Mm-hmm.
And in my dirtbagging days, I was a dishwasher too. And I've never connected with this guy. I'd love to tell him the story, but his name's Pete Jordan. But so he had this zine called Dishwasher, and I basically was like, all right, I'm gonna do my own zine. And this guy I worked with had the title. He's like, "Man, I was tripping on mushrooms, and I came up with this idea called Moonlight Dream Chasers, and I just want to use it someday. I don't know what for." And so we called the zine Moonlight Dream Chasers, and it was all about like some fiction, some nonfiction, some building stories in Salt Lake City. And so I did that zine, and then I shortly after that I got my first writing job at my alma mater in Gunnison, Western Colorado University. And then I did one more zine, and then I was like, "Oh, let's do a climbing zine." So it was supposed to be a one-time thing, just called the climbing zine, and we did it, and it was black and white stapled together. And then I lost this said job kind of near the end of the like 2008, 2009, whatever economic recession.
Mm-hmm.
And then I needed something to do. So I just kept doing the climbing zine. And then we expanded it out to including color photos. And then it, started to cost some money. So I like liquidated my entire retirement savings from 2 years of a full-time job, which, probably about 20 grand or something, and put it into the climbing zine, and have been doing it ever since for 15 years.
I think it's fascinating that, like, amidst the recession, and also when print media and magazines are going downhill, you're like, I'm going to start a zine, because like it's not even like a magazine. A zine, zines are usually passion projects, like you said, written by people who just like really want to share something, and they will pay some money to get it printed and staple bound, and then maybe it'll end up in a zine library somewhere or distributed online if you're lucky. But you actually turn this into a consistent, reliable print publication that generated enough income to sustain your life. What was it sustaining? Were you still living kind of hand to mouth dirtbag style, or did it actually generate this excess of income that you could use to feel a bit more stable and secure?
No, never in excess. Not yet, not yet. So the first 7 or 8 years, I had a restaurant job as well. So I went back into the restaurant world for a while, and sustained it with that. So I've been doing the zine just as my income for about 7 or 8 years. So it was like the side hustle for a long time. And then it grew into doing it for my job. I would say 15 years in right now, I'm like, hopefully the most growth from the business will happen in these next 10 to 20 years before I kind of finish it off, and that'll be my career or whatever. But yeah, it's always been a hustle. And then, for me, incorporating a podcast and then incorporating and Essentially a clothing line with it. We do some stickers and stuff too, but just having real like creative,
Hmm.
artistic ideas and turning them into a clothing line has really helped support it. So, um, yeah, certainly like one of the like not quite hand to mouth. I own a condo. I have health insurance. I do all the normal things that an adult is supposed to do to have a financial base. But yeah, it's still so certain times I'll look back, I'm like, oh, maybe I should have gotten a job with a 401k or stuff like that. And still,
Yeah.
I still might get another job, but yeah, it's right now. And then I have those thoughts, and then I see people getting laid off from their jobs. Like no, certainly no good job is safe. And so I'm like, yeah, I kind of rather make a little bit less money and no one's going to fire me tomorrow. And I still have my
Hmm.
base um, of an income and have my own business. So, yeah, at this moment, I feel pretty good about the trajectory of it, but there's definitely, yeah, plenty as any small business owner knows, there's just like the stress of cash flow, is just always on my mind.
Well, I think it's a very cool achievement, and adding merch in there, adding the podcast. Let me get a few kind of financial based questions out of the way here. Were you able to do this on your own? Did you have any outside, cash or support that, was the only way that this would have been possible? And then talk a little bit about how this zine actually made money. Did income come from subscriptions or sponsorships or something else? And just starting in the early days before you expanded into, um, yeah, the merchandise and the podcast.
Yeah, it's been a really cool journey. So most of the zine comes from historically it was advertisement. So the real decline of magazines didn't happen until like 2021, from my perspective. So when I started it, there was still, we go to meetings, we go to outdoor retailer festival or trade show, which is an event for the industry to connect with companies. And you could get time, you get 30 minutes with Patagonia, 30 minutes with Osprey, 30 minutes with Black Diamond. And you pitch them on your ad in the magazine. And if you have a good pitch, I had up my buddy Sean Matasavich, we call him the publisher emeritus, but he's just my friend who had business savvy, and we just go sit in meetings and pitch. So that was under the old model of like magazines. We're a zine, but we look like a magazine in a lot of ways.
Okay.
And our competitors at the time are Climbing Magazine, Rock and Ice, and this is before they stopped print. So you're presenting your numbers to them. We're a bit cheaper, so some of these brands, they like what we're doing. We're going to support you. And so that was the kind of like that was the way that's like the easy money, getting advertisements. And then slowly we get subscribers, but our subscriber, I really got some help from this publication called the Mountain Gazette to be more savvy about our subscriber base. So our subscriber base is just as important or more important than the actual sponsors now. Where it started off, it was just the sponsors were really enabling the printing. And then printing is so much cheap then too. So you could print 10,000 I can print 10,000 copies 5 years ago for what I can print 2,000 for now.
Whoa.
So it's in my mind, the big shift happened with 2021, like COVID. So, sponsorships are very important. We've had some of our sponsors have been sponsors for 10 plus years. We have good relationships. They respect our art of what we're doing. And then as time goes by, it's the subscriber base. But then now that we have a consistent base, some people want everything we have, so people will collect the old zines and we can put those up for sale. Some people want all of our clothing line, all of our stickers, everything. So that was really the journey. And then not too much outside help. There was this guy, I won't say his name, I don't know if he wants to be known, but one day he just found like volume 4 in Yosemite. He's like, I want to support you guys. He's a pretty loaded business guy who just likes to seed small businesses. And I thought it was a spam, And I
Yeah.
talked to the guy on the phone, and he Venmo'd me a couple $1,000, and he's done that. It was before Venmo, it was probably PayPal or something, but this one gentleman has, and I think he started climbing in like his mid 60s or something after he had his career. And so that guy has sent us a little bit of money. And then, I do come from, a stable family. So it's like, if I need to get a loan on something, I can get a loan from my family versus like getting a loan from a bank with, better interest rates or whatever. So, but yeah, it's been just kind of this thing that started off with companies, and companies are very, very essential to our business. But the foundation now is each individual person,
Mm-hmm.
and in that adding up to however, if it's 5,000 people, if it's 10,000 people, like somewhere in that range, there's many, many dedicated climbing zine like fans out there, and it's kind of like, that's like the Grateful Dead model, it's like, it's very much Grateful Dead, like it's like Grateful Dead in 1981 or something,
I love that that's still in your head as a model. It seems like a tough time to be asking for subscriptions just because everyone else is too. Subscribe to AMC Plus, subscribe to the Substack writers. Everyone wants $5 or $10 a month from you. How do you cut through the noise? How do you think you're able to retain and to increase your subscriber base when there's so much competition?
I mean, so I just gave some new climbers a zine last night. I was sitting next to a buddy and had a couple zines on me, and they were asking about it. So I gave them one, and this woman spent the next half an hour looking at it and like absorbing the art. And she was relatively new to climbing, so she was asking me about things. And so if I was pitching somebody on my Substack, we could talk for a little bit. And Substack is very powerful for some people, but a piece of tangible art is going to break through all that. And then she's going to take that home with her and probably tell 1 to 5 people about it. And she's going to maybe even give that. She's going to hopefully subscribe. But even if she doesn't, she's going to give it to someone else who might. And then that person might subscribe for the rest of their life because they love it, So I think it's a piece of tangible art. And that's when everyone misses, where they're like, oh, print is dead or this and that. It's like, yeah, I mean, it's an easy thing to say, but it's almost more relevant because it will capture more of the attention span versus, oh, I have a Substack, here's a link to that. That's going to end the conversation. But me handing this person a piece of the art that then they're going to look at for a half an hour, it's like, how many other things are going to do that,
Mm-hmm. That really reflects advice about publishing that I read from Seth Godin, maybe a decade ago now.
Yeah.
And talking about how if everything is going to become more digital, that actually means that print and hardcover books will become more valuable because they're just a bit more rare and special and coveted. Yeah, interesting. At this moment in your life, are you still needing to get income from other sources than the climbing zine? And if so, what are those sources?
I mean, in an ideal setting, yeah, I would love to get more money.
No,
but,
not ideal, Luke.
No,
this actual life.
No, I don't. I mean, my income comes from my business. Yeah, so there's not really additional like sources. No, it's all from that. Yeah.
Earlier, you said that you actually like working 40 hours a week on your projects and your business. Now, how much do you think you actually need to work, like minimum number of hours, and you can average this over whatever period seems reasonable in order to sustain the business and to finance your life?
I mean, I'd probably say that around that 40 hours. I think so much of what you do for work and like for me in this space, like a full day of climbing, if we're shooting photographs or I'm like thinking up a story, that ideally could all count as work, So the line is, well, especially as a writer and artist, it's like, you don't walk out climbing like I'm working today, but in the back of your head, if you meet this really interesting person that you're going to interview for your podcast, that's work. If you're like picking somebody's brain who's just an interesting person. So I definitely think that I'm definitely not one of those, I'm gonna like 4-hour work week people. Like that's the biggest bullshit ever. That guy. Tim Ferriss. I know Tim Ferriss is smart, but his 4 hour work week thing is insulting. So yeah, I don't have that like tech, like I'm going to work 5 hours and be a boss. I think,
Yeah.
it's just, I think it comes down to being a writer artist. You're constantly kind of absorbing things, and then you're there's like just a lot of dabbling too. It's like you might sit down and write for 4 hours and it doesn't amount to anything, but that's still work. So
Yeah. There's just not a good
yeah, with
definition that's widely shared about like what working hours means, or if you're self-employed, or like you said, a writer or artist, what, how you even decide when you're in that zone of calling something work or not work. And if you're really enjoying it, seems to be the most important part. Maybe in the future we'll have some metric like the amount of stress hormones running through your body over an average week, and like the people with the least, then it's like doesn't matter how many hours you say you're working. If you're doing it in this kind of enjoyable, meaningful, like I'm super activated, engaged kind of way, like you said, you're out there and you're climbing and you meet someone who's interesting and you're like, oh, maybe I can interview you for the podcast or turn this into a story. I mean, that's the good kind of work that you want to have in your life, to feel like you have purpose, right?
yeah, for me it is for sure. And it doesn't matter, like I don't have a person to report to with my hours, so it really doesn't. To me, it doesn't matter. But and that's why I think I just go back to that 4 hour work week, and just like, hey, you can't be a writer and work 4 hours a week, like, and then yeah, it's just I think the point of that, I didn't read that book, but I think the point was just to be very methodically organized. And with all this technology in the world, you probably like some person probably do that, but yeah.
Well, I mean, there are people who are self-employed and feel very stressed out by it. And it's not a very enviable situation. And they're like, yeah, I'm self-employed, but I'm working 60 hours each week and I can't really take vacations. I can't really go and spend time with people I like or do the activities that I love. So just to be clear, you're not in that situation, right? You still have time to do the exercise and the socializing and anything else you want to be doing.
Yeah, I mean, definitely have moments of stress for sure. But it's not all the time. Yeah, it's um and it comes and it goes with I think usually with cash flow, just like you gotta when you have these big bills, and then you've got it, and it can just change so much too, from month to month. But yeah, I would say I definitely have high levels of stress, but on the day to day, I think that's what, keeping up a good work schedule, and just like if I'm in the, maybe you could look at it like an athlete, like if I'm in the gym training, there's going to be highs and lows, but if you have your base level of work, there's going to be, and as time goes by, as my audience keeps growing too. So the more I have the base of an audience, the more I feel comfortable with it. But yeah, I definitely have moments of stress, anxiety, all that stuff with financial stuff. It's certainly a part of it. Yeah, those are the moments where I wish I maybe took a different path. But at this point, I've taken this path, and I think the other thing too is like I can always get a job. It's like I could always get a night job somewhere, or do something else. So I think that's a good thing to remind myself of. Is like I don't necessarily have to do it like this, but I've just chosen to.
I don't know, Luke. Once you've been doing the self-employed thing for long enough, and doing it on your own terms, I feel like it becomes this kind of nice bedtime story that we tell ourselves, like, oh, I can always just get a normal job. And it's probably true, but I wonder if once you've been in this long enough that just you're addicted to the autonomy and the sense of control. Yeah.
But if the money goes away, I mean, I don't know if you're familiar with the show The Sopranos.
A little bit, yeah.
Yeah. There was this actor who played the junior, and he got that job, I think, in his mid 60s. And he was basically a starving artist actor, lived in like 300 square foot apartment in Manhattan. And he has this phrase that money is truth. And so he didn't really find his financial security till his 60s. But it's like, if I was in debt, or if I, if the money went away, if the economy goes to crap, if people stop or, whatever, like there still is that alternate route of having to get a job. For me, in my mind, it feels like it's still a reality for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And especially if something like a severe depression happened, it would be like, well, obviously you just have to take whatever you can get. When you look around, Luke, and you meet these other climbers, these other dirtbags, people who are passionate about being in the outdoors, using their bodies, and you look at their financial situations and their work or their jobs, who do you feel a bit envious of? Who do you look up to in that regard? And who, when you look at them and you hear about what they have to do to make money to sustain this lifestyle, you're like, oh, thank God I'm not doing that.
I mean, not too many people. I mean, I'm not necessarily like, obviously I wish I had like a 6-figure income that maybe some of these tech people do. But I don't want to do code, I'm not necessarily envious of anyone. But I think there's something you can learn from everybody. But I think just like people that have balance and are happy, and that can come at any age, any career, whatever. It's like, oh, you're doing something that you enjoy, and then you enjoy this other thing, and then also like, yeah, do you have healthy relationships? Do you treat people well? It's just like the people that find happiness in those, that is a coder, like there are people that are coders like, oh, this is one of my favorite people, and then there's people who are in grad school, and then there's people who are nurses or doctors. I think it just is that individual happy, and are there, there kind of seems to be ways to have a lot of avenues to pursue your passions these days. And like right now I'm just trying to find like balance and happiness in my life, and so anyone who has that, regardless of age or career or whatever, those are the people that kind of inspire me. But I mean, I think the professional climbers are, if they're making a decent amount of money, that's an envious thing, that's pretty cool. But I never quite was that good of a climber to like follow that path. So
something that I get asked and I don't have a good answer to, so I hope you do, is what does it look like when you have a dirtbag who stays a dirtbag until they're like old? We're talking like dirtbags in their 60s or 70s. And I wonder if you have run into any of these people and whether they seem genuinely like happy and living balanced lives, even with like very little money.
Right. Yeah. I feel like those, the maybe the few people that pursue that and are living pretty hand to mouth, to me it seems lonely. I can't really like think of anyone that fits that bill that doesn't seem a bit lonely, or isolated. And so
what is it that makes it lonely or isolated? Is it if you don't have resources, then you can't go access communities or networks of people or share activities with those people? Why couldn't you be poor and still living in community, or like, hanging around certain groups?
You could be. I just can't think of an example.
Which is kind of damning evidence.
Yeah, I can think of older, and I'm starting to fit into that category, which pisses me off when I meet these younger climbers that they put me in with like these 60 somethings, and I'm like, dude, yeah, I'm like, fuck you. But I can think of people that still climb well. But as far as being on the road, living hand to mouth, living in your van, that to me seems like a younger person's thing, to be happy, and then eventually that goes away and they move on to the next thing. I'm sure I'm missing an example. There could be, but that's always been something I wanted to avoid. There was a climber that I won't name him, but he was in our community in Gunnison and was always just like smoked out and kind of like talking shit and hardly didn't climb that much, you know. And I was like, I never want to end up like this person. Like
Mm.
that was always a goal of mine. So, um, yeah, I think to me, it's like if I'm like that, at 65, I want to have a partner. I still want to have a home base, even if I'm traveling around a bit. I just think like trying to live like a 25-year-old as a 65-year-old. I just can't think of a good example of a happy person. That
Mm.
to me, it's more important to have that like balance of additional things in your life, you know, because that freewheeling living in a van is like it has an expiration date to be
Mm.
fun. You know, I think maybe some van lifers that are listening might disagree with me, but I'm definitely more. Maybe that comes back to my Midwest roots or whatever too. But
Let's talk about purpose. You mentioned that word earlier, and in earlier conversation, you told me that you really find purpose when people send you direct messages or you run into them in person and they say nice things about something that you've published or put out there. Um, what are your sources of purpose, or what makes you feel like you're doing something that's actually important or actually has some meaning in the world?
yeah, yeah. So I mean, I think it used to be more knowing that people connect with my writing and um, knowing I'm putting things out there that kind of improve people's lives. And now that that feels more like a constant of just a result of the work, it's like purpose within relationships and friendships. That seems to be the most important thing for me. Like you could change a stranger's life, you could really impact someone's life, but that's not going to give you purpose day in and day out in your life, you know.
Mm. Hmm.
So it's more, yeah, like the people you interact with on a daily basis, your friends. You know, I don't have kids, so I think that in a lot of my friends do. So I think that you can see that purpose that drives their lives within having a child. You know, I'm never going to have that. So it's equally important to, yeah, invest in, you know, your intimate relationships and then your friendships. So that's where I'm at right now in life, just in general. Is just like, yeah, how do you? And I think that, you know, talking about all this like technology and things, you know, my job doesn't demand that I interact with a lot of people in person all the time. So I have to create my life in a way, and that's the reason I'm here in Puerto Chico, is that, you know, there's always people that I am interacting with, and I can just go to a place and have a one-on-one conversation. Where my life back in Colorado is, the climbing gym is really the only place that gives me that, especially in the winter, you know. So um, it's I'm just trying to be really intentional about realizing that, in just like trying to maintain my face to face interactions with people. And
Hmm.
um, so yeah, it's really that, like the people that are close to you that are the ones that are kind of for me, like they're going to form the rest of my life, you know.
Yeah. And what you said about Potrero Chico, I felt that when I spent 3 seasons in El Chalten in Argentina. Even though I'm not a
Mm.
climber or a mountaineer, I just like to like hike and trail run essentially. But it was so
Yeah.
easy to meet super interesting people there who are there to climb, or they're there on a cycle trip, or they're there to do some of the biggest hikes of their life. And just like it was like a magnet for these incredible people from all over North America, South America, Europe, Australia, New Zealand. They just came from everywhere. And so placing yourself in one of these hubs, maybe that is some kind of, secret to being, especially if you decide not to have children, to having this sense of community and purpose and these strong relationships for as many years as you desire. Being the old dude in the mountain town that everyone loves.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I know there's a lot of truth to that. And my friend Katrina Blair, is actually, um, she's a friend of mine just recently passed away, called Kurt Blair. His name's Kurt Blair, and that's Katrina's brother. And we were he just had his memorial last month in Durango, and I went back for that. And we were having just a side conversation. Like Kurt and I, when he was here, we were talking about kind of everything we just spoke about a bit of just, there's more of a vibrant community of your friends all over the world. And then you go back to your hometown and it's maybe less. And so Katrina and I were talking about, she's writing a book. She's like a naturalist. She's like the person who will hike 60 miles and just forage the food along the way, really amazing person. But she was talking about that community that exists on the edge of these mountains, and in how in she's probably going to write about it in a more poetic way, but it's like there's something very, very, very important there that I think greater other communities can learn from. And just like, as now we're minimizing our human interactions because of all this technology, what are we taking away that then these places still have those, like perfect case studies? And how many people are missing out on these communities because they just do different things, or, or maybe people aren't missing out at all. Maybe certain communities have all of these things, but they're just not mountain communities,
Yeah, that's a big question for a different podcast. But let's definitely talk about your podcast, Luke, because you've been running the Dirtbag State of Mind for 5 years now. And
yeah, we started just before COVID. Yep. Yeah.
Are you mostly talking about climbing with climbers there, or are you having bigger picture conversations?
Definitely both of that. Yeah, I mean, I think the everything climbing zine is use climbing as a base and then open things up. But it's a hybrid. So sometimes it started off just me reading my books as like a free version of an audiobook. And then it was also like, oh, there are these people like what you're doing, like here's an interesting person I want to talk to from the climbing zine. Or like I just interviewed Alex Honnold, it's like that was really cool to be able to interview Alex Honnold. And so it's like this hybrid of storytelling podcast, which is, I think, unique in the climbing space. And then that the thing of just the classic podcast of talking to someone for an hour and using climbing as the foundation, but also talking about whatever interesting things, come up. And so that's what I've used the podcast format for. And then for me, it's just like been a really fun part of the job, because writing can be so tedious. Putting a publication together is so time consuming. And sometimes you're just staring at a computer and you're hearing somebody's story, but it's through the written word and you're just like laboring over it. Some pieces take a year to come together. So it's the podcast is the most fun part of my job, I would say. I hope you feel about that about yours too.
Yeah, well, I'm using this podcast as a way to gather interviews for the book, but I had this other podcast, Off Trail Learning, for a number of years that was more in the alternative education space. I completely agree with you. It's just extremely intrinsically rewarding just to have an excuse to connect with interesting people. And you start out talking about education, and then it goes somewhere different, and it's work that doesn't feel like work. It's great.
Yeah. And it's I think with conversations too, like honestly, climbers can be pretty boring to talk to, because if you know where a certain climber is at and all you're going to do is talk about climbing, it's like I can predict the conversation. But if you have an hour, especially with someone like an Alex Honnold, or I interviewed Tommy Caldwell as well, like these are like, it's like some of the most interesting people. Like if you're not just going to geek out about climbing and you want to actually hear stories, you're going to get a more in-depth conversation than just like spraying about climbing,
Well, we've talked about the climbing zine, the Dirtbag State of Mind podcast. You've also written 5 books. What else is out there in the world that people should know about that you have produced or are producing right now, Luke?
Oh, I mean, that's really the foundation of my work is within the written word. And then, expanding out to the podcast. I'm working on another book now that hopefully I can write in this next time period. I've been working on it for 3 years, in the sense of just, I think books take a while to come together. So you're like sometimes not ready when you start writing or whatever, but in my mind right now, I'm just trying to write another book, and it's just as hard as ever. So it's it's just the struggle is never ending with being an artist. But no, that's the foundation of my work is very much the climbing zine and my books, and my early books, kind of like the one you quoted, like kind of feel like my mixtapes. If you're like an artist, you like release earlier small things, and so um, yeah, it's that is a pretty comprehensive of my body of work is just kind of the written words, and then the stories I've helped other people kind of put out there.
And where should people go to find out more about your work and what you're up to, Luke?
Climbingzine.com, our website. And then we have a pretty active Instagram has kind of been the most successful social media thing that we have. So we're the Climbing Zine on Instagram. And yeah, those two things. Then yeah, the Dirtbag State of Mind podcast, which is in the podcast world. You got Dirtbag now too. So I think we'll all be there together. Like some people will come up to me and be like, "Are you the Dirtbag Diaries guy?" I'm like, no, not at all. But I'm not ashamed to, like that word Dirtbag Diaries is like the OG podcast, and so happy to be associated with them. And then now Dirtbag Rich will probably be we'll all be in the algorithm together.
I was also just informed that later in 2025, a biography about Yvon Chouinard is going to come out titled Dirtbag Billionaire. So the more the merrier.
Oh boy. Yeah, that's an interesting one.
Luke, thanks so much for coming on my podcast.
Yeah, my pleasure. It was really fun to talk to you.